Pranjul Bhandari, Chief India and Indonesia Economist at HSBC. She joins us right now on the show. On the back of a note which said that, I'm not paraphrasing it, or it's not verbatim, but that 25 basis points is a given, if you will. Now, Pranjul, just before we get to what the RBI will do, because there's lots that the RBI's actions will depend on, but are you sensing slightly unprecedented times when you look at how do you analyze the economic impact of various actions?
Absolutely, right? This is a big shock, and we just went through the whole COVID shock. So like it's been shock after shock. Global economy is a little fragile. So of course it really hurts at this point of time. But look, when I look at India, I think of course in the short run there is going to be pain. My sense is that the direct impact of 26% tariffs can be, a growth lower by about 50 basis points, directly speaking, and then the indirect impact can be a little more. But I think what we should not forget also is that there are some offsetting factors that are there in India. One is the fact that services exports is still not being tariffed. At least for now, pharma is not being tariffed. And then we have certain strengths domestically. I think the biggest strength is that inflation has fallen. It's below RBI target. My sense is it will remain below RBI target for at least a year, which means there's a lot of space for monetary policy easing. On the fiscal front, after the pandemic, we have really followed the fiscal consolidation path, brought it down. It has got us a lot of macro stability. But if push comes to shove, if the growth cost is very high, then the fiscal deficit can also be increased again, although I don't think it will be the first port of call. The first port of call will be monetary policy easing. And then some people ask me, can India actually effectively increase fiscal quickly? And my sense is yes, because we have all of this digital payments set up like PM Kisan and all, Narega, digital money goes to rural Indians. I think it can actually ramp up very quickly if push comes to shove. And then the final point I want to make is our own domestic demand. The fact that rural incomes are actually going up at this point of time after 2 bad years when we had back-to-back climate shocks. Right now we've had 2 great crops, Kharif and Rabi. My sense is that, because of base effects, rural income, rural consumption will be a very big, contributor to GDP growth going forward. So we have our own strengths at this point of time. Of course, the short run will be painful, but we have enough to sort of muddle along.
Got it. Enough to muddle along. Pranjul, so is your base case 25 or has it shifted to 35 or is it changing? I also asked this in the perspective or in lieu of the fact that the US yields are behaving very erratic. As somebody put it, US debt is behaving like EM debt. Does it kind of force the MPC's hands to do something that they normally wouldn't do in such a scenario?
Well, the truth is that I think if the MPC does something very out of the ordinary, it'll give a signal that it is in panic mode, which I think is the wrong thing to do at this point of time. Already, I think the RBI governor and his team has taken a lot of steps on liquidity.
Agreed.
And if notice how they've been doing it, they've actually been going step by step. First they started with liquidity. Even in liquidity they started with FX swaps, then they went to OMOs. There was, after some liquidity, there was one rate cut. So they're not doing everything all at once. They're doing it step by step, and my sense is that right now is the time for a rate cut. I do think it's going to be a 25 basis points. Honestly, it can be anything, but I don't think it's not my forecast that it will be a 50 bips, because I think that will show a sign of panic, which you don't want to give. But I do think that we are going to see back-to-back rate cuts. I have a rate cut in April, one in June, one in August, and if need be, I think beyond that as well. So I think we can see a series of rate cuts. The other few things I'm expecting today is forecast changes. I think the growth forecast at 6.7, the inflation forecast at 4.2 are both pretty high. I think that can be nudged lower. And once that happens, in a way, it on its own becomes a signal that more monetary policy easing is likely, because the forecasts are in line with monetary policy easing. So these are some of the things I'm expecting: rate cuts, emphasis that liquidity will remain in surplus, and forecasts of growth and inflation being brought down.
Pranjul, what would surprise you from the policy statement if it were to come out? You told about 50 being a signal of panic, so let's leave that out. What else? Is there something that could be a positive surprise or a negative surprise?
Okay, so look, I don't know why I'm bringing it up just a few minutes before policy meeting, but a lot of people in the markets are also expecting a stance change. Now, RBI has had a stance of neutral for a very long time, and they are saying today is the day to say that it's not neutral anymore, it's accommodative, which will become a signal of the fact that RBI wants to ease for a prolonged period. Because look, markets are not only thinking about April, right? They want to see if there is a lot more of easing in front of us, right, and get comfort from that. So they are saying stance change will be a big signal of exactly that. My own sense is they don't have to change the stance. They're doing everything that they want to do, like rate cuts, liquidity, regulatory easing, with a neutral stance. It's nice to have neutral, because my sense is that if something goes wrong and the world economy does a massive U-turn, you can also quickly do a U-turn, and your stance was already telling you that I'm ready to do U-turns anytime. I'm neutral. I can move on either direction. So there's a lot of benefit of holding onto neutral. But I do think that if they hold on to neutral, some participants in the rates market might see it a tad negatively in the short run, because they were going into the policy meeting with expectation of a stance change to accommodative.
Got it. Pranjul, just one final question. If the US Fed is going to be decisively hawkish, some economists said that it was probably the most hawkish Jerome Powell that they've heard in some time. And if they are going to be decidedly hawkish, does that impede the 3 rate cuts and a possible 4th rate cut if needed stance of yours?
Yeah, look, in India, we are, I can say, like a sort of relatively closed economy compared to, say, Korea or Vietnam. So, of course, what happens globally is very important, but we also have to look at what happens locally. And locally, all signs are pointing towards rate cuts. And the biggest one is inflation, right? Food inflation has come down very rapidly. The rupee depreciation is sort of not held on the way it was, and therefore that we were fearing core inflation will rise. That has not really panned out at this point of time. Oil prices have really come off. So my sense is that there's enough domestically to support the kind of rate cut I'm talking about. And even if with 3 rate cuts, you go to a repo rate of 5.5%, which in my definition is neutral. So we are not overdoing. If we cut a lot more, then you overdo, and then you have to think about Fed. But we are not overdoing. We are just going back to neutral. So I think that for at least the next 3 rate cuts, we could be relatively independent of what happens globally, at least at this point of time.